Maybe America isn't bowling alone, and that's good for your health and longevity. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I read a couple of stories in the last day or so that really kind of upset the apple cart and gave me hope for the future, not only for our country, but for my own self. Being well advanced in my dotage, I think that this could be good news for anybody like me who is descending into geezerhood or ascending into geezerhood, however you choose to do it. Remember in 1995 when Robert Putnam came out with the book Bowling Alone? And the general thesis of the book, I read it back then, but the general thesis of the book was that Americans are not joiners like they used to be. And so society is becoming somewhat fragmented, and groups like, the Rotary Club and the Lions Clubs and Knights of Columbus and things like that were kind of having a hard time recruiting. And that certainly is a pattern that has continued. However, there's some research that shows that in some areas, that's not what's happening, and that we need to really start advancing in those areas if we want to live longer and be healthier. And here's what I mean. A Harvard study on adult development that was started in 1938 and continues to this day. They're tracking people's health and happiness. And what they found, the common denominator for longevity and for health and happiness is not like cholesterol levels or anything that you might expect like that. Basically, it comes down to the quality of your relationships and your sense of purpose. And that people who have many good relationships with other people and who have a sense of purpose in their lives tend to live longer, healthier lives, and feel happier about it. And this gets back to, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He found that in the death camps, the people who tended to survive were the people who had something to look forward to. They were able to keep in their heads this idea of a future that they needed to get to. And so that gave them a sense of purpose, and they just wound up surviving at much higher rates than people who didn't. Friendships, as they're defined in this study, don't happen easily. They said that to make a casual friendship takes about 60 hours of work. To get a close friendship, they said about 200 hours of work over a period of about 4 months, if you really want to develop a close friend. So basically, they're saying, you're not just going to fall into friendships. You really need to make an effort. You need to get beyond the awkwardness. You need to step out and develop friends intentionally. But that tied in with another story that Selena Zito wrote for the Washington Examiner about this little town of Somerset, Pennsylvania, where I've been a number of times. It's a town of about 12,000 people. It probably used to be more, but because of the steel industry and coal industry and everything else, it's kind of dwindled down some. But she focused the story on a bowling alley there, where the employees have been largely working for generations. So it is owned by the son of the guy who started it in a nearby town, and he moved from a town of 1,000 people to the big city of Somerset with 12,000 people. And the place is immaculate. Everything from the balls to the shoes to the lanes is shiny and bright and looks like new, and people are coming. And friends are gathering. It stunned me to find out that despite Robert Putnam's book Bowling Alone, nearly 70 million people in the United States bowl. Like this is something they do for recreation. About 1.2 million people compete in certified bowling leagues. There's a corporation called Bolero Corporation that owns 325 bowling centers in the U.S. And last year, they added 40 more. Stephen Green, this connection between something that we thought was an artifact of the past and these long-term studies that show friendship and activity together and building those kind of relationships and a sense of meaning and purpose should provide us with some hope. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, Steve, our audience skews more toward that end of the demographic spectrum. What do you think is going on here?
There is a Bolero at up in Denver, just about 35 minutes north of here, at C47, or excuse me, C47. Anyway, it's on 470 and University, and I've driven past it. I can't even tell you how many times, because two of my best friends, Matt and Allie, live in that neighborhood in Highlands Range, and I saw the name. I don't know when they first converted whatever that used to be to Bolero, or if it's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
But I saw the name and I thought, well, isn't that clever? And I figured it was just some small locally owned thing that might have been on its last legs or something. But to find out that this is some national thing that is growing and expanding and giving people a lot of fun, well, hell, that's great. I want to go. I thought, okay, clever name, but I bet inside it's all like 70s leftover dingy stuff. And to find out something completely else, I got to take my boys. When I was a kid, I used to love bowling, and in my 20s, I would go occasionally, and it's very social. You get to have a few beers. Every few minutes, you're called to exert yourself by picking up something that weighs anywhere between 14 and 16 pounds, taking a few steps, tossing it, probably having to toss it a second time after taking a few more steps, and then sitting back down with your beer and your friends and your conversation. It's a really, really fun game. I almost said sport. I'm not sure if it quite goes that far, but it's a lot of fun. I used to enjoy it a hell of a lot, and all I find myself asking myself right now is, why haven't I taken my kids? I got two boys, 17 and 12 and a half. Oh, Lord, how did that happen? And I have not introduced them to the world of bowling. And my youngest is probably about the same age I was when I first started bowling, and just a little 12-pound kid ball. You could probably toss that thing directly down and not even touch the wood now. And my 17-year-old might think he's too cool for it, but if this has grown and is growing the way you say it is, Scott, I'm thinking there might be some teenage girls there that might get him sort of interested in this nerdy, goofy, older person game. I know you're trying to talk about the bigger aspects of this, but I don't want to. There's a perfectly small thing here that I haven't been doing, that I know where to go to do it. I know who to bring with me. And the only thing I have to say is, number one, I'm going to do this. Three things. Number two, my boys are going to love it, even if the older one resists at first. And number three, there's no way that my wife is going to join me, because there's no way she's going to wear other people's shoes to do anything.
Well, you know what to get her for her next birthday, her own set of bowling shoes. And a ball, too. You're not going to want to stick your fingers in somewhere where somebody else has stuck their fingers. But I'm sure at the Bolero, they clean the holes meticulously. So, Bill Whittle, actually, Steve is wrong. I didn't want to talk about any grand issues. And in fact, the same thing happened to me when I read this story. I immediately thought, hey, Stephanie and I and Mike and Donna and Don and Sarah and Brian and Linda should go out bowling. And then immediately I go into old man mode and I go, oh, is this going to hurt my back? Do I do I need to? Maybe we should go and take a lesson first from a chiropractic bowler so that we can do this right. But here's buried in this story about bowling that Selena Zito wrote, I thought was a fascinating idea that was brought up by a guy who I think is a former geography professor at a university. And he said, we typically look at towns like Somerset, Pennsylvania, again, roughly 12,000 in population, a dwindling population, we would say. And we say that, the once great boom town is now fading away. And he said, maybe rather than that, they're actually returning to their natural size after what I would term kind of a mass industrialization, man-centric assembly line kind of boom that happened for really a relatively brief window in history when men were doing what a lot of robots can now do. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Like maybe it's not Somerset shouldn't be a factory town. And in fact, the person who went up to visit, and it may have been Selena herself, who went up to visit Somerset, was surprised to find a vibrant little community and a nice looking little downtown. And that people who live there like the welcome they receive when they move there. They like the fact that it's a nice little tight-knit community where everybody knows everybody. And the guy who owns the bowling alley now, kind of a turn of the phrase on the Robert Putnam book, Bill, said, "You're never alone when you bowl." And I just thought, that is a charming idea that, we used to hold this idea of small town America, but it did kind of get ruptured by the big steel plant or the big automobile plant or the big whatever plant coming into town. And all of a sudden there was a rush of people who were from outside of the community. And then a lot of those people had to leave, or their grandchildren anyway had to leave after it ended. With the ability to do remote work that's not so cluster, oriented, do you think that this is kind of not a picture of America's past, but a picture of her future?
Well, I certainly hope so. First of all, you said that the casual friend is 40 hours of work and a close friend 600, I think you said.
60 versus 200, yeah.
Okay. Well, we've been doing this show for probably 10,000 hours. I don't know what that makes us, but
it makes us Justin Bieber fans. We love that song.
That's right. We're believers. So I'll go along with this one. The one constant in any study of people who end up in prison, especially for violent crimes, it doesn't correlate to race, doesn't correlate to class, doesn't correlate to money, doesn't correlate to geographic background. The people who are not in prison for at all, but especially for violent crimes, are people who grew up having dinner with their family. It's not even most people think it's the presence of a father, and that's a lot of it. But really what it was if you sat down and had dinner with your family growing up, you didn't develop these pathologies. And as the family's been destroyed over the last 2-3 generations, we see people like these shooters, these mass shooters. And it's not that if we'd had this kind of, socialization with the same people, right? If you social contacts with people, it's not like suddenly we would have said, "Oh my God, you're shooters," you put them in jail. They never would have become sick enough to become shooters, right? Because we would have seen them, instead of at 17 when they're shooting up a school, we would have seen them at 9 when they're isolating or they're behaving a little weird. We would have intervened and done something about it earlier if there had been social connections to these people. So the destruction of all these social connections is what leads to all of these social pathologies. It's tempting to blame a lot of this on the internet and smart devices, and certainly they've accelerated the trend. But when you take people from small towns, move them into big towns, you are moving them into an anonymous world where they don't know anybody. When you start having television, then you are parking your children in front of a electronic babysitter, and the internet is television cubed, right, in terms of interactivity and so on. So all of these social networks that we used to have, I don't mean real networks, not social media networks, real friends who used to hang out with all the time, who would sit down, or you had to crush on the girl and they'd get you through it, and you just be your friends. These things are rapidly falling apart. I think part of the problem is when they destroyed the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts by making them no longer the Boy Scouts, and now we're the Person Scouts, right? That was the organization that I joined first, was the Cub Scouts.
Yep, same.
And so we think, well, we're going to socialize. Well, we're going to go out on the town. We're going to go to a bar. We're going to go to a show. We're going to go to a concert. Doesn't count. You don't know those people there. You'll never see them again, right? What counts is, do you have a close group of humans who you see on a regular basis, whose trust you develop and who you in turn trust, who can set you straight and help you out and give you, a sense that you're not alone, and plus have a lot of fun with, which brings us to the bowling, right? The thing about bowling is, Steve got into it a little bit in terms of you mostly sit there, have a beer and joke, and you stand up and you roll the ball twice and you sit back down again. And you have to have certain behaviors polished. You have to have your, it's a gutter ball polish. You gotta know how to do that one. You gotta know how to do the strike, even though I'm randomly rolling it in the direction. You gotta make it look like I did this on purpose. That you gotta get that thing down. But there's a lot of ribbing that goes on in bowling, a lot of teasing, which is great, really great thing to build camaraderie and friendship and stuff. So yeah, I find this to be an incredibly encouraging sign. And I suspect that as society continues to get more and more isolated, the appeal of people meeting on a regular basis will increase. And ultimately, when you think about it, that's all that a 12-step program is, right? I mean, you don't get medicine at a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. You don't get injections. You're not given medical treatment. Those programs work to the degree that they work because you are now in the company of people, and it's the same people multiple times a week, and they've got your back and you've got theirs, and that sense of connection and love and duty and loyalty and all these things are able to cure people from horrible pathologies like alcoholism and narcotic abuse and all the rest of it. So yeah, we're social people, and the entire Western civilization has been more and more isolating over the last 30 or 40 years, and anything we can do to get back to being with people is a major bonus. Just to put a cap on this, I have often talked about the science fiction story, a series I want to do, and called The Colonies, and I've got an entire storyline that takes place at the frontier. And I want to do a shot where you're on an alien planet, you got a couple of alien moons up in the sky, and it's cold, and everything's really, it's clearly this, and you see this little base down there, and there's this little, essentially steel spheres or, tubes that people are living in, and they got rovers there, and you get closer and closer and closer, you see a little warm light inside one of these things, you get closer and closer and closer, you begin to hear the sound, and when you look in the window, this is 200-300 years in the future, you see 30 people inside this hab, and they're all making live music together. They're playing guitars, they're playing violins, they're singing, right? They are doing what humans do to humanize themselves. And I thought the idea of having this really alien environment where you get close and inside this warmth, you see people using acoustical instruments, and they're just doing that. And they're not just entertaining themselves, they're recharging themselves, and they're renewing themselves, and they're building the things that they need to have in order to survive on the frontier. So yeah, I think this is awesome news.
I just saw a movie the other day that y'all probably saw about 30 years ago. We talked about it a little bit in our backstage episode, a movie called Catch Me If You Can. And there were two scenes from this movie that strike directly at this topic. There is really, you might call it an epidemic of loneliness in this country, probably in this world, but I'm not that
exactly
tapped
right.
into the world, where we've never been more connected through fiber optic lines, but we've never been less connected in personal contact, in face-to-face interactions, in true friendships, in, when somebody says something, it's not like, I can show that I care about them by tapping a little emoji that pops up and then move on to the next, short reel video. There's a scene in Catch Me If You Can where Leo DiCaprio is this on-the-run criminal, and Tom Hanks is an FBI agent who's trying to catch him. And Leo calls Tom at his office on Christmas Eve. And Tom has decided to be nice to all the other guys in the office and man the phones on Christmas Eve so that they can go home and be with their families. And they have this conversation that's really awkward. And at one point, Tom Hanks, the FBI agent, says, I know why you're calling me on Christmas Eve, you criminal. He doesn't say that, but I know why you're calling me on Christmas Eve. You don't have anybody else. And he just cracked up laughing and then hung up the phone. And you see him mocking Leo DiCaprio's character because he's a criminal on the run. He's got all this money, but he has no one. And you realize that the FBI agent doesn't have anyone either. And he's there on Christmas Eve. And that becomes kind of a recurring theme in the movie. And the other scene Bill reminded me of, is at one point Leo DiCaprio is pretending to be an attorney, and he's going to marry a girl who is the daughter of an attorney. And he's at their house, and Martin Sheen plays the dad, and he's at their house, and they're in the kitchen, and then all of a sudden somebody says, oh, it's on. And they all run to the living room and all sit together on the sofa, the mother, the father, the daughter, and this guy who's going to marry their daughter. They all sit together on the sofa, and what comes on the TV is Sing Along with Mitch. And Sing Along with Mitch was a TV show back in the 1960s. It may have started earlier, it may have run later, but they put the words of songs on the screen, and these were old kind of classic folk songs and American songs and Irish songs or whatever. And you would be able to read the words. It was karaoke before there was karaoke, except you didn't do
Didn't they have a bouncing ball or something?
And now they didn't
Follow
have the bouncing ball in the movie, so that may have been something that they added later. But I remember watching Sing Along with Mitch, and all of a sudden, this family that had been having normal family conversations in the kitchen is sitting on the sofa together and singing this Irish song together. And Leo DiCaprio, who's like just looking back and forth at them, and slowly like a smile comes across his face. And the daughter kind of jumps up on her dad's lap, and they're singing together. And all of a sudden he's smiling, and then he starts mouthing the words. And you can just see that it was an experience of family and togetherness that he had longed for and not experienced. And he needed to have that. And if anything, what I got from these stories and the movie this week is that desperate need that we have to not be alone, to be in fellowship with others, to have connection, not just with family, but with people around us. You know, if you asked me, hey, do you want to quit your job where you work, my W-2 job, tomorrow? My first thought would be, I would really miss my friends. It's really, I'm not there for the job. I mean, yes, I'm there for the job, and I try to do a good job of it. I try to take care of customers well, but I'm like, oh, wow, I wonder how I would ever see Ken and James and Jim and Brecca and I just start going through all these people I work with. We not only need that psychically, or emotionally and intellectually, we need that for physical health. Like, you're going to be happier and live longer.
That's right.
Frankly, if you turn me off and go make a phone call or go out to dinner or find somebody or a couple of somebodies and go bowling. Nobody bowls alone. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com, who, by the way, get to interact in forums and comments and on the blog, and I know have made connections offline. We encourage that. We know that is important to your health and well-being, and it's what sustains this business. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon on Right Angle.